Hello everyone, welcome to another Stukent expert session. My name is Trevor Erickson and today we have Zach Olsen with us. He's the Digital Analytics Manager for Columbia Sportswear out of Portland, Oregon. Today Zach will be sharing his knowledge on how to measure and optimize website behavior, as well as understanding business objectives and important key performance indicators. So without any further ado, Zach, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Trevor, for that introduction. It's a pleasure to be able to present with Stukent. I'm excited for this opportunity, and I'm going to run you through this introduction to web analytics. And I think it's a good starting point for understanding what web analytics is and where it fits in with all the other online marketing or research tools that are out there. So before we talk about web analytics specifically, I feel like it's important to preface where web analytics fits in with all the other online research tools or methodologies. And so, as you can see in this quadrant here, web analytics sits in the qualitative and behavioral section. And this is important to realize because while web analytics has tons of data and tons of information that can be gained from it, it doesn't tell you everything that there is to know about a customer or why they're doing what they're doing on their site or how they're doing what they're doing on your website. And that's why some of these other tools like surveys or interviewing customers or usability testing really come into need. And so web analytics shows you what people do on your website. You can see how many people come to the site, how many people clicked on X page or how much time they spent, what they did when they were there, how many people converted, how many people didn't. But like I said, it doesn't tell you why people are doing what they're doing. You might see that your website has, like if it's an e-commerce site, has a 2% conversion rate. So there's 98% of people who aren't converting, and so why? Why aren't they buying? A survey would give you some insight to that. You could ask a question like, what's your purpose for coming to the website today? And then people could tell you why they're coming to the website, and you could find out that a huge percentage of people who come to the website are actually there to buy at all. They're there to contact customer service, or they're there to do research, to buy offline. Same thing goes for usability testing. With web analytics, you'd think you'd be able to know how people are navigating throughout the site and how, when they see a product detail page, how they're engaging with it. But it's not always super clear with web analytics. Some of that ability to, they call that pathing reports or something, are pretty challenging to look at and understand. So usability testing is super beneficial in those cases. In the same quadrant here are some of the vendors or tools that web analytics or usability experts use for large organizations or medium-sized organizations too. So I'll run through each one of these really quickly because I think it's important and it's fun. And from a learning perspective, you can go to each one of these vendors' websites and learn a lot about what they do and why it's important and how they really add value to organizations. So in that qualitative and attitudinal quadrant of surveys, you've got things like 4C, which I'm sure you've seen this before, where that thing pops up when you're browsing a website, or Opinion Labs, this other screenshot here, where you see this little plus box on a web page that allows you to click a button and give feedback to the website that you're visiting. This information can be very helpful in creating a customer satisfaction score or net promoter score, or getting feedback on why people aren't able to do what they're doing on your site, which web analytics doesn't really tell you. So going back here, we're going to move on to the quantitative and behavioral. So this is, Adobe Analytics, also known as Omniture, is on the top there. That's just a sample of a graph, and then below that's Google Analytics. And yeah, you see this trended data, year over year, of all the different kinds of metrics that you can think of is what web analytics can provide. And Google Analytics is free, available to anybody who has a website. And there's also Google Analytics Premium, which last year costs $150,000 a year, which is obviously for much larger e-commerce or large organizations. And Adobe Analytics is paid. It used to be called Omniture, and it's used by most large internet retailers. So Columbia, who I work for, Best Buy, Guitar Center, Crocs, Nike, everybody uses Adobe Analytics, and it's very expensive. And the difference between these two vendors is that it's kind of the difference between Mac people and PC people. Whereas Mac people, it just works, right? And that's kind of how Google Analytics is. You install the snippet of JavaScript on your site, and you open up the reports, and Google Analytics just works. It just puts out the reports in a very systemized, non-custom way. Whereas Adobe Analytics is 100% customizable for PC people, right? People who like to who have specific needs, have specific requirements, and they're able to customize it to their liking. And then there's also, like ClickTail and Crazy Egg and Hotjar. There's these tools that allow you to see this heat mapping, which is data-driven as well, but kind of gives you a different perspective. So you can see on the left-hand side, you can lay on top of any page of your website heat maps that show you where the concentration of clicks are going on, which kind of gives you a more graphical look and allows you to analyze your site a little bit differently. On the right-hand side there is that shows you how far people scroll down a page. So there's a certain percentage of people don't make a certain percent down your page when they're scrolling, so that might give you an insight on how you can change your website. And then interviews, I'm not going to go into too much because that's just kind of what it sounds like, right? You have to talk to customers. And qualitative, you've got usability testing as well as some of these multivariate A/B testing tools. So things like remote usability testing with UserZoom. UserZoom provides people who you watch. You can see like you just look at their face as they're using your website with a specific task. So you tell them, like in this example, hey, find this particular product and then tell me the price, and then you watch them and see what they do. And this can be incredibly revelatory in a way that web analytics can't be sometimes, where you see like, wow, I had no idea people got hung up so much on X task or trying to add a product to cart. A/B multivariate testing could probably use its whole expert session in and of itself, but it just has to do with making changes, making two different versions of a web page, and then in real time sending a split amount of traffic to each. So in this example, you can see that there's a version A and a version B, where the web designers here have created two different kinds of landing pages, and then they have a metric like how many people are clicking that button to sign up for a free quote. And they use traffic to test which one performs best, which can lead to some great ideas. And personalization is the next step of this, which is really huge with large e-commerce companies, especially now, where all the data that's collected on you as a visitor to the website, it's in your browser, or maybe if you're a loyalty customer, can be set into a profile. Like you can see this girl's in a certain kind of profile, that she's a female and she's married. And so when she visits this website, they know certain things about her when she arrives, and so they're able to change on the fly dynamically the product on that page or the view of that page to fit more of her. So you can see that it's female focused. It's referring to California explicitly in the ad copy. It's got a picture of gifts because she's married. All that kind of stuff can be incredible for improving conversion rates. So specifically onto web analytics now, there's two sides of web analytics, and there's the analyst side and there's the implementation side. So most of the time when we think of web analytics, we think of the analyst side, which is creating reports, and analyzing data for looking for conversion trends or trends in traffic, and then with those insights providing optimization or ideas to the organization about how to improve the website to get more money. The implementation side is just responsible for the code that sits on the page, and this is really important, especially when it comes to Adobe Analytics. And this person's kind of like a programmer, right? They have to know JavaScript to a certain degree. So that, let's say the organization has a new landing page on the site, and they want to track how many people are clicking on a new button. That implementation person has to be able to put the code on the page so that that action is tracked and sent off to the software so that it can be viewed in reports. So these two things are really important. I pulled this. I was looking up on Indeed.com for jobs, and I found this one for Patagonia, the cool outdoor company, for this e-commerce marketing analyst. And you'll notice in this minimum job qualifications, there's lots of skills here that are looking at both the analyst side as well as the implementation side. When it talks about how familiar with tagging and tracking methodology, and then you can also see at the same time experience in working with SEO and SEM and marketing and all kinds of other things, so that when they're looking at this data, they know what it means. And so learning both sides is really important and really beneficial when you're looking to get the kind of skills and experience to get jobs like this one at Patagonia or elsewhere. And so when you're analyzing a site, I think I kind of categorize it in two different ways. There's a marketing optimization side of website analysis, and then there's a user experience side. So marketing optimization is where you've got all of these different paid channels that are sending traffic to your website. That's paid search, display, retargeting, and you as an analyst look at all those different sources of traffic and you see how they perform, and then you can make suggestions with a few different objectives, right? One is to allocate the marketing budget differently. So if you see that the paid search traffic that's coming to the website isn't performing as well as, say, retargeting, you can say, hey, let's shift our budget and give more money to retargeting. There's also the analysis of being able to try and figure out what landing pages all that traffic should go to. So you're spending tons of money on paid search, driving people from ads on Google onto your website. Are the landing pages that they're landing on the right ones? Maybe they could be changed, or maybe they could be moved to a whole different page altogether. And the other side is user experience, right? So if you think of like the website as a machine, and each page has a purpose. And your objective here is to just reduce friction and usability and improve conversion rates overall. So, if you look at this page of the site, like what's the purpose of this page? And the purpose of this page, maybe there's different opinions who you talk to, especially within an organization. Maybe the branding people have a different opinion, saying that this is educational, or it builds brand awareness, or the social buttons are there so that they can increase, share of mind within the customer or something. But from a web analytics perspective, I think it's a good bet that the purpose of this page is to get people to click on that big add to cart button. And so you could create a calculated metric of how many people visit product detail pages divided by how many people click on the add to cart button, and you got that got a ratio there, an add to cart conversion rate, so to speak. And so that can be your guiding metric, and you can say, okay, well that currently is 15%. How do we get it to 20%? And if we were able to get it to 20%, what does that mean on the bottom line of revenue? And an increase of 5% of getting people to click on the add to cart button could potentially be huge in overall revenue. And so you might say, okay, well, what could we do? What data is there that would help us figure out how to make this page perform better? You could look at what things people are clicking on. You could, of the people who look at reviews, do they convert at a higher rate? So you want to have something on the site that tags how many people click on that reviews tab and read reviews. And then you could divide that by the amount of people who look at the site, or see how many people, the correlation between people who read reviews with conversions. And then you'd be able to say, okay, well, there's a high correlation between people who read reviews and buy something, so maybe let's make the reviews the default tab on this page. As one example. Or the amount of people who click on the size and fit guide is really important. So maybe that size and fit guide should be more front and center, or maybe it should be a different color. Or maybe the add to cart button should be a whole different, maybe that should be green to stand out more from the page. All these different things, actions that you can take and trying to figure out based on data of what people are clicking on or how they're interacting with this page to try and get that metric of add to carts to go up. And so when you're thinking about web analytics, from the start, you get to this idea of web analytics really is a tool to make change, to choose what to do, to make changes. And you have to keep in mind what the business objectives are of the organization, of the website, and what the key performance indicators are that are aligned with those business objectives. So you might have a business objective for an e-commerce website to reach certain revenue targets. So obviously, the KPI there is sales. That's easy. How much money are we making from this website? And then maybe another business objective for the website is to expand brand name recognition. And so when you think about that, it's like, well, how can my data in my web analytics tool show me how well we're expanding brand name recognition? Or maybe how valuable is expanding brand name recognition in the organization as a whole? And so you might see, well, it clicks on the social share buttons on the site, like clicking on the Facebook like button or clicking on a tweet button or Pinterest. Those clicks are something that can be tracked because there's an action that happens on the site. And you can count how often that happens, and you can also see of those people who click on those buttons, what actions they take next. They have a high propensity to purchase also. And so then you have a KPI there of, okay, so we have a business objective, expand brand name recognition, and we'll measure that with how often people click those social share buttons, as an example, right? Or maybe, you get a business objective of increase customer loyalty, so you want to have people come back and buy more often instead of just being one and done customers. So You could look at your return visits, or or how many orders you get from return visitors, and then also, tracking email signups. The more people who can sign up for email, the longer your relationship with that customer can be, and the more you can incentivize them to come back and purchase again to increase that loyalty. And so you might have a KPI to measure customer loyalty as email signups. And then the last one I put there is, how do we increase customer satisfaction? Well, that's where, something outside of web analytics, like a Net Promoter Score, where you're actually using a survey that shows, a question that says, how likely are you to recommend this website to a friend? And then you can use that Net Promoter Score and maybe segment it over on top of different sections of the site or user types to get an idea of what kind of customer are we really doing well for or doing a good job with, and who are we not. So this is really important. It looks simple, but it's challenging because there are lots of business objectives, and it depends on who you talk to on what the business objectives are, because the marketing person might have one objective to have a return on ad spend at a certain rate for their marketing dollars, and then there might be the brand marketing guy who's really cared about how the site looks, and how well it does in portraying the brand essence, so to speak. And so having the skill of being able to whittle down the KPI or the action on the site that relates to the business objective is a really important one. And so whenever you're in a situation where you're talking to someone about web analytics, you're going to say, what should we track? Or how should we measure? And it's like, well, what's the purpose of your website? What's your business objectives? And then we can find actions on the site that match up with those business objectives, and then measure them over time and see how well the website is performing at reaching those business objectives that are important to your business. So this is, an example of that, right? So here we've got a bunch of different channels. This is from Google Analytics. Different channels of traffic: direct, referral, organic search, along with 3 columns here: acquisition, behavior, and conversions. And so Google has set this up in a very clever way that's really smart, I think. And so it's first of all looking at acquisition. How are you attracting website traffic, and how much of that is new sessions, meaning visits, and new users, which means visitors. And so a visit is how many times someone comes to a site, but a visitor or a new user is that one person. So one new user might visit 5 times and be counted as one new user. And then that behavior, bounce rate refers to when someone comes to a website, they go land on that first page and then they leave again, meaning that they didn't go any deeper into the site. So a high bounce rate is bad. You want people to, when they first come to the site, go deeper into the website. So a high bounce rate would mean that their expectations for what they thought the website would look like don't match up with how the website really is. And then conversions there is that outcome, right? Like a business objective in this case is sales. So in this little screenshot I took, you can see that the paid search channel has the most goal completions or sales on the site. And so with this information, you can say, well, what is it about these channels that's unique or different? How can I use this information to make changes to my website? Maybe my paid search obviously is super important. It's the only one driving sales. And why is that? How can I get more traffic or qualified traffic in these other sources so I don't have to be so heavily tied to paid search? Or looking at just direct. So this is also Google Analytics, and there's this thing that allows you to do segment data, meaning you can just look at the traffic that's direct along with all the other traffic. So in this view, we're looking at all sessions to the website, and then that blue line is direct traffic. So you can see it makes up quite a bit amount of traffic. So when you're looking at this, you might be saying, why is average time on page for direct traffic more than site-wide traffic? Or why does direct traffic make up 32% of total traffic? Now the bounce rate is also higher on direct traffic. Why is that? These questions, basically web analytics just causes more questions to be answered more often than not. But it's the starting point of using those questions to dive in deeper and figure out more of what to do and how to change on your website related to those business objectives. So if we were going a step further, say, okay, this is interesting, direct traffic. Let's look at direct traffic by page. So the direct traffic that comes to the website, and I guess I should have said direct traffic is that traffic that just goes directly from the URL, right? So they're not coming from a search engine or anything else. They're typing in the website.com into their browser and hitting go, and they're coming directly to the site. So that's what this traffic is unique, right? Those people already know about this brand or this website. And so we can look at this by page. So here's a bunch of pages for this website, and the way the direct traffic, you know, is different with them. And you can see that the About Us page has some page value, and it's that last page about development that has the highest amount of page value. And the way that page value is created is that whenever a sale happens on the site, however much that sale is worth, it's then divided by the amount of pages that user had before they converted, before they made that sale. And so you can see the page value for that development page is really high. So how do we get more people to that page? I think would be a next good step after looking at this page. You could say, okay, so that page is really important in driving sales. Let's see if we can get that page to rank higher in using SEO in an organic search. Maybe we can drive more traffic to that page and get more free sales. Or what about our email? You know, like if we start up an email campaign and try and capture emails from customers or try and capture emails on the site, can we email those people and get them and use that high converting landing page in the email and drive traffic directly to that page? And what's up with all these other pages that don't do crap? Like they're not, you know, making any money. So how come? You know, what is it about those pages? So I might dive in deeper to one of those particular pages and look at all the different sources of traffic for that page. It's like, is it just direct traffic on this particular page? Is there a bunch of traffic sources that aren't doing very good? So hopefully that it gives you a good idea of web analytics, kind of where it sits in all of the research that one can do to learn about a website. And it shows you that web analytics isn't the one and only place to go to learn about how customers are behaving on your website. There's multiple ways to do that. And that when you're analyzing a website, the way to do it is to first start with your business objectives and your KPIs. Use those KPIs as your guide, and then look at your traffic and look at your website behavior through the lens of those KPIs. And you'll be able to come up with the inferences or the ideas to be able to turn the needle, because looking at this data is only beneficial in as much as it allows you to make changes that influence those KPIs, right? Like knowing that the home page gets 3,000 visits, like who cares? You know, that's not going to do you any good unless you can say, oh, well, I found out that, you know, if we made a link on the home page that goes to this really high converting page on our site, make that page more prevalent, we would be able to make a lot more money. So let's try sticking that link on the home page and then see what happens. And then afterwards you can see how that idea panned out. So where to start with all this stuff? You know, if you're just getting started with web analytics, before Stukent, I would say that the way that I did this, as well as everyone else I've ever known who works in this industry, is they did it on their own. You got to get a website, either make one or find a family member who has one. Family members are good because they can't get as mad at you if you mess something up. And you can install Google Analytics on it, which is free. Install Hotjar, which is this great vendor that allows you to do heat maps and that scrolling stuff like I showed you. Set up goals within Google Analytics, like those KPIs. Figure out what's your business objectives of your website. Like if you start a blog that's about artisanal pizza cooking, then you can write a bunch of blog posts and content and set up some AdSense, you know, Google Ads on your site to try and make money off of that content that you create. Figure out how to get money get traffic to your website, and then measure it, you know, with your goals. And this is worth its weight in gold, being able to do this process of figuring out how to do web analytics. It's really something that takes practice. It takes being in the weeds and implementing it yourself and working at it. If I can help, let me know. Thanks a lot for this time. There's my website where I blog. It's bydatabedriven.com. My personal site is echolson.net, and you can tweet me if you feel obliged. And I think there was some questions. Let me see here. Okay. Question number 1. When should my company start thinking about moving from Google Analytics to a paid service like Adobe? So, That's a great question. A lot of people have gone the other way too. They've gone from Adobe to Google Analytics. It really depends on how well Google Analytics is working for you. Like, what are the needs, or what are you missing with that you think you could get with Adobe Analytics? Google Analytics, I'd say if there was a spectrum of, like a scale of 1 to 10 of features and benefits, let's say Google Analytics is like a 5, right in the middle. And let's say Adobe Analytics is an 8. Google Analytics is still pretty darn good. You can still see a lot of information that's really beneficial, that allows you to make a lot of changes that are worth a lot. But it doesn't have the level of customization that Adobe has. So if you're feeling like there's certain things that you just need to be able to do that you can't, that's when you would move into Adobe Analytics. But to be honest, you have to be a pretty big organization. I'd say all small businesses, and I'd say most medium-sized businesses, Google Analytics is brilliant. It gives you all the information you need. I think more often than not, people are looking for some sort of magic to come out of the data, that they just think, well, maybe if I had a different vendor, the magic would happen. But I think you can get plenty of insights on how to improve your business with Google Analytics. Adobe Analytics is enterprise level, millions of dollars in sales revenue kind of a tool. Okay, there's another question here. Do you have any suggestions on mastering Google Analytics? So I've touched on this a little bit of how to master Google Analytics. I think that it really comes down to trying. You've got to do it. Go on Google and then search for Learn Google Analytics. And you will find a plethora of blog posts that will teach you what you need to know. There are many, many websites out there that will take you from beginner to expert, right, of trying to figure out how to do this. There's lots of chaff, right, that you've got to weed through, and lots of trial and error. And you're gonna, there's chances where you're going to read information that maybe is not quite right, but that's just how learning works. And I think doing it is the best way to go. With implementing Google Analytics on your own website, you can also use Google Tag Manager, which is a cool tool that allows you to make changes via an interface as opposed to on the code on the site. If you use WordPress for your website, a lot of other, basically all the other CMSs out there too will allow you to be able to use a plugin or something that makes implementing Google Analytics super easy. And then you just mess around. That's the best way to do it. So I guess if there's no other questions, I'm done. I appreciate this again, and Trevor, I'll turn the time back over to you.
All right, thanks, Zach. Appreciate your time today and the knowledge that you shared with us on digital analytics. Let's be sure to show Zach some love and hit him up on Twitter @Zach Olsen. And have a great day.